You are watching Co-op for Two, broadcasting live from Champaign, Illinois, Monday night, August 29th at around 11 p.m., 2022, for those of you who are watching this in the future. Today we are continuing our playthrough of the play-by-mail case Sherlock Holmes Fellowship of Bones, created by the Murders by Mail company. If you haven't seen the previous videos, you should start there. This is turn 8, I believe. We'll play this. It'll take us about an hour. Then we'll have a little break. Then at 1 a.m. we'll play our L.A. Noire play-by-mail case. Let's check in with the chat and make sure the audio and video is okay. Anna's here, Blake is here, Jonathan is here, Matt is here. Okay. Blake is also from Illinois. Interesting. So we all met last week and played through one of the cold case games from a series that I'm not familiar with, a brand new series, which was Cold Case Unit, Cold Case Investigation Unit. And we played the Diamond Heist case, and we had some real mixed feelings about it. You can watch our 7.5-hour playthrough, but everyone seemed to be up to playing another one of those cases from that series. And then we have another series, Cold Case Crackers, which we also are curious about. So I think sometime later this week, maybe Wednesday or Thursday, we'll play either another case from that series or from the Cold Case Crackers series. I do want to point out it's now Monday night at 11 p.m. and I put up a poll on the YouTube community tab, which I encourage you to visit if you haven't seen it and voted yet. I asked people when the best time for these playthroughs are. You can see the top 3 are pretty evenly split. Weekday evenings, weekend mornings, or weekend evenings. Then in 4th place is weekend late night. And then in last place is what we are right now, weekday late at night. So this one is being played at the worst possible time for everyone, but we're trying to play these play-by-mail cases as soon as they arrive so that we can get faster turnover. All right, what else should we catch up on? We've got our normal movie catch up. Has anyone seen any good movies, seen any of the movies we've talked about? I'll tell you while I'm waiting for your reply. I'll tell you what I saw. I saw 3,000 Years of Longing, which is the Jin movie with Idris Elba and Tilda Swinton. I can't remember her last name now. I thought actually that it was pretty good. It's a little anthology told in short stories, but I thought Idris Elba, who's always pretty good, was really good in this one. Just very understated, calm, not over the top the way we're used to these kinds of movies being acted. Just really good performance by him. And yeah, good. Sort of unexpected, unpredictable, but very good. I would recommend it. And then we also saw The Invitation, which was terrible. A horror movie. And I'm really starting to feel like modern movies are getting really bad, and I'm curious as to why that is. And I saw some posts, some essays about how 20 years ago the number of the chances that a blockbuster movie would be a sequel was like 2%. Now it's like 10%. Anyway, all the superhero movies and the sequels and stuff. And then there was an interview with maybe Matt Damon about how the movies used to make a good chunk of their money on DVDs. Now the streaming service has killed that, which makes it much riskier for them to make a movie that's not going to be a blockbuster mainstream. So a whole bunch of reasons are making these modern movies terrible. But the good news is that I'm enjoying rewatching older movies more and more. And so that's okay. I think I'll just pass on. I mean, I'll still see the modern movies, but I don't expect them to be good. I'm just going there for the popcorn. On a related note, I watched the commentary for Year of the Dragon. This is Michael Cimino, director. He directed The Deer Hunter and a couple other amazing movies. Year of the Dragon is one of my favorite movies. Jonathan Warner watched it last week and said he was sort of mixed on it. And I've seen it a dozen times or so. It's a bit controversial and it could definitely offend people. But I heard about the director's commentary for it, and I watched it. And it wasn't, first of all, I started watching it, and then I remembered how much I liked the movie. So I watched the movie first again, and then I watched the commentary. The commentary by Michael Cimino is not the best. There are some commentaries, if you're interested in the theory of movie making and filming and stuff. I remember watching the commentary for Election, which is amazing, and the guy's talking about how he tries to put circles in the scenes when certain characters are there on screen and squares on another scene when different characters in the scene. But Michael Cimino is not really a theoretician, and he was just saying, I don't have formal training. I just do what seems right. But the really interesting thing about the Michael Cimino commentary on Year of the Dragon is that he mentions Clint Eastwood like 15 times. Like, Clint Eastwood is his hero. He's the person responsible for his entire career. It's his sort of philosophy of life is taken from Clint Eastwood. Like, everything from Michael Cimino comes from Clint Eastwood. Apparently, Clint Eastwood gave him his directorial debut chance with Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. But just shocking how much Clint Eastwood comes up in the Michael Cimino commentary. Okay, chat says Matt said no movies, but went to Cirque du Soleil on Saturday, which was good. That's it. All of that rambling is to give you guys time to chime in, but no one had anything to chime in on. All right, let's give you a couple more background stuff before we get started here. Ever since I mentioned this idea of being able to zoom into areas of the screen and crop out outside it, which we mostly use when reading the Sherlock Holmes paragraphs, I've just about finished that plugin for OBS. I'll make a video on it in the next week or so, which you can watch if you're curious. And we'll try using it the next time we play a game like Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. It works quite well. I'm quite proud of myself. It's got a little machine vision stuff going on. It'll be open sourced if anyone's interested in that kind of thing. I don't know if it's going to actually be more trouble than it's worth, but we'll give it a try. Another thing to mention is I started a thread on the Board Game Geek Guild section for this channel. There's a link to that in the YouTube community tab, where I just ask people who watch the channel to tell me a little bit about themselves. I'm not the best. Some people, some friends in your friend group are very social, and they always make sure to ask people, like if they meet someone new, they ask about them. I tend to not do that. I don't know whatever it is, it feels intrusive to ask people about themselves. So I don't tend to do it on the channel. We've got some regulars, Jonathan and Anna, and it would be fun to hear a little bit more about you guys. So if you want, If you're willing to share a little bit about your personal life, whatever you want to share, your family, your backgrounds, your hobbies. If you watch this channel more than once or twice, you don't have to be a regular, then find that thread and maybe post something about yourself. And there in the Co-op for Two Guild on Board Game Geek, you can also help us decide what games to play next. Jonathan was asking if I thought we might want to play a kind of horror mystery game, especially maybe near Halloween. So I think we'll probably try to arrange that. We'll play one of these mystery box games, not Hunt a Killer. Jonathan found some from a company called the Deadbolt Mystery Society that are focused on horror stuff. So maybe we'll try to get one of those in around Halloween. I'll be having a murder mystery dinner at my house for my local friends. Blake says, I believe a lot of movies for thinking adults are moving to cable and streaming, turning into limited series. Well, I think that's quite true. That's a very good point. We're seeing a real move towards TV series for high quality stuff. Like if you want the more thinking, low key stuff, instead of being in movies now, they're on streaming series. That's true. We've got an abundance of very good streaming series, and a lot of them made outside the US, which is even better. All right, anything else to talk about before we get started here? I think that's all I have to say. All right, let's remind ourselves where we were here. On our last turn, we sent someone off, Wiggins, who's been chasing the cab that brought our bloody person from the back entrance of the Burlington house. We talked to the cab driver, said there might be blood in the cab, let him off here at this crossroads, watch them going east. So we decided in the end we would send Wiggins to this one building that's the most likely path that this person might have taken. We're going to see if they've seen them. My gut tells me that we're not meant to find this person since they seem like the likely culprit, but maybe we'll catch a hint of them. I guess we could just open this up rather than do it twice because it does remind you where you sent them. Okay, reply number 7. All right, so where did we send people? We sent Wiggins to location E12, and it's got someone's name, Richard Davidson. Okay, so now we've got a possibility that we weren't supposed to know to go to this address yet. We'll find out. Because we don't know this name. This could be our murderer that we just stumbled upon because it was near the cab. We sent Watson to the Sheridan Club. The Sheridan Club was mentioned twice, you'll remember. It's the club where we have the newspaper telling us there were robberies from Gentlemen's Club, especially the Sheridan's Club. And I believe we were told that it was one of the last places that John Lawson went. John Lawson, remember, is the person who's the opium-looking guy who hired us. He tells us what he did on the day of the murder. He says he went to the Bank of London. He left 4:30, so before the murder. He also tells us he went to the Sheridan Club for his dinner. So we have 2 reasons to go to the Sheridan Club. So that's where we sent Watson, who's got some prestige. And then we sent Hudson to visit what we think is the brother of our murdered paleontologist. Okay. So here's Watson at the Sheridan Club. The Sheridan is a small and exclusive club in Covent Gardens with an abundance of leather armchairs and velvet drapes. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and the odor of cigar smoke hung heavy in the air. I introduced myself and explained my errand to a footman, and shortly found myself speaking with the head butler. "We've already spoken to the police several times about the thefts," he said. "I don't see why Mr. Holmes would distract himself with such a trivial matter, when there's a shocking and high-profile murder to be solved." I found it best not to question his methods. Many a line of inquiry that seemed completely coincidental has proven to be pivotal to a case. I would be obliged for any information you could give me. "It's much as was described in the newspaper. Small items have been vanishing, generally from the cloakroom, or when left unattended. One of the constables on the case described it as crimes of opportunity, and not the work of a professional thief. We, of course, have been questioning the staff, but have not found sufficient evidence to accuse any of them. Our hiring practices are quite rigorous. As much as it pains me to say so, I suspect it to be the work of one of our members." Someone falling on hard times, perhaps, I asked. "Given the expense of our dues, our clientele are invariable men of means, so I have been inclined to reject the notion. But that was before yesterday. One of the victims found his snuff box in a pawnbroker's establishment run by a Chinese gentleman. Our member was obliged to purchase it to get it back, an expense which we have, of course, reimbursed." That sounds like a thief who is down on his luck, and an amateur at that. Any professional would work through a fence. "I am certain you have a greater understanding of such criminal enterprises than I, Doctor. Now I've told you all that I can. Unless there's something else, I have duties to attend to." I bid the butler good day and was on my way out when I ran into Mr. Lawson, who was just arriving. He was flushed and sweating, and he startled visibly when he saw me. "Why, Doctor, I didn't know you were a member of the Sheridan." "I'm not. I'm here to look into these thefts." "That hardly seems a good use of your time, but who am I to question the great detective? Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm late to meet a friend for dinner." "Of course. Good day, Mr. Lawson." Okay, so here's Mr. Lawson, the same guy we just talked to. He's hanging out at the Sheridan a lot. This time he's meeting a friend for dinner. Interesting. Okay, so what did we learn here also? We learned that it's been pawned. All of these things being stolen are being pawned. Pawn shop run by a Chinese gentleman, so if we want to look at pawn shops, that will help us know which one to go to. And then now, because of that, we say it sounds like a thief who's down on his luck and an amateur. So we think it's probably a member of one of these clubs who's down on their luck and is an amateur. But this could be our murder victim, could be the thief, or someone else he ran into. But we know he pawned his boomerang, so it does seem quite possible that he is the thief, although he has been out of the country for a while. Crime of opportunity, not the work of a professional thief. All right, that seems like all we've got there. Although I do wonder who John Lawson is having dinner with. Let me just make a note here about the Sheridan. John Lawson is also a good candidate for being the thief, right? Is he the thief? We know the thief is pawning at Chinese pawn shop. Which also tells us he's an amateur, because a pro would use a fence. And maybe he's a club member. All right. There was a pawn shop in the paper that we planned to go to. Yes, absolutely. Now, what is this run by a Chinese gentleman? It's Barnard and Strand. That doesn't sound like a Chinese gentleman, but we do have other pawn shops in the directory. We could see if one of them look like they might be run by Chinese. Yeah, look at that one. So we do have a pawn shop run by Lu Hong. Southeast 59. We might want to go to that one. Now, let's take a look. Where is Southeast 59? Might that give us some clue? Southeast 59 is just a bad part of London. Looks like down here somewhere. So we don't have anyone else that we know of that lives down there. 59 would be here, all the way in the corner. So there's the Chinese pawn shop. Well, I'm assuming that's the Chinese pawn shop because that's the only one in the directory. If that is there, we don't know anyone who lives there, really. We do have a Southeast 44. Let's see, they're a little nearby. Who did we send to Southeast 44? Southeast 44 was the East India Docks. Interesting. All right, let's continue here with our next location. All right, let's save Wiggins for last. All right, so Miss Hudson went to the relative of the dead paleontologist. Let's see what she can find. Blake says, I don't remember the pawn ticket on the victim mentioning the shop, did it? I believe it did, and I believe it was the one that's in the newspaper. I'm not positive. We can check again, but I believe that it did tell us the pawn shop, and I believe it was the one in the paper. All right, let's see what Hudson found. Besides the late Warren Edwards, the only other entry for Edwards is in the postal directory is for a small block of flats just across the street from Victoria Station. I found the flat marked A. Edwards and rang the bell. A young man answered the door, dressed in a black suit with a high starched collar. His face was thin and dour, and he looked for all the world like an undertaker on his day off. Yes, what is it? He said sharply. Good day. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Sherlock Holmes. We're looking into the murder of Warren Edwards. He cut me off with a loud sigh. I did not know Warren Edwards, and I'm certainly not his brother. As I've already explained to the police, 3 newspaper reporters, an old lady ranting about a diamond mine, one ruffian who seemed to think I owed him money, and that barrister's clerk. Never heard of the man before he appeared in the newspaper, and his death has caused me so much trouble That were he still alive, I'd be inclined to kill him myself. But the newspaper said he had a brother, and only seems natural that he cut me off again. I don't know where that reporter got his information, and I don't care. If you're so intent on finding this dead man's brother, may I suggest you go down to the paper and talk to him directly? While you're there, you can give him a thump on the ear from me. Now, if there's nothing else, if I may impose for a moment longer, what was this about a barrister? What was his business with Warren Edwards? He sighed louder this time. Yet another person owed money by the late Mr. Edwards. I didn't give the fellow time to explain further. He insisted on leaving his card, though. He reached into the wastebin by the door and pulled out a calling card. Here, you may as well have it. I have no use for the beastly thing. I only wish this whole business would blow over and I could be left in peace. I apologize again for disturbing you, sir. Thank you for speaking with... this time he cut me off by slamming the door in my face. I looked down at the card in my hand. It was from a Mr. Archibald Collins, barrister, Southwest 59. Okay. So, this is a barrister I believe we already know about. This is one of the people suing him for the diamond mine. We asked, what was about the barrister? Yet another person owed money by the late Mr. Edwards. Okay, that's all fine. We've already tracked down this thread. But here we've got a thread about how to find the brother. We say, newspaper said he had a brother. That's how we found this guy. He says, if you're so intent on finding this man's dead brother, go down to the paper and talk to him directly. So it's saying, talk to the guy who wrote the paper saying he has a brother. Maybe the guy who wrote the article might know where his brother lives. Let's see. And let's just reread who's been asking for him. The police, 3 newspaper reporters, an old lady ranting about a diamond mine, so another woman he ripped off, and a ruffian who seemed to think I owed him money. And barrister squarked. Okay. So the main one that seems interesting, relevant to us, might be that we should go to the paper if we want information on the brother. So Edward's name, this is not brother. This is the person who's not the brother. He says, ask newspaper about brother. That's one of our informants. So someone who works for the police news. And what else we're told? Okay, Archibald Collins. I don't remember if we've gone to this person's office yet. But we do know what it's about. Southwest 59. Barrister. Let's see on the map if we've actually been to this particular barrister's address. Yes, we have. So we have actually already been. This is the barrister that our dead man owes money. Okay. The thief maybe thought no one would go there, so that would be safe to pawn things. Anna is suggesting maybe the reason why he used this pawn shop in the corner here is because it's so far away, he figured no one else would go there. That's not a bad idea. Okay, let's read this Wiggins one. Remember, this is the place that we went to because it was on the path, And I'm a little concerned we weren't supposed to go there. Let's read what it says. Richard Davidson lives in Whitechapel, just off Commercial Road. Given the number of beggars and street urchins, it reminds... All right, so we're going to pretend... We have to thematically imagine that we just knocked on this door near where the cab driver last saw this guy. We don't know how we found his name, but we found his name. Richard Davidson lives in Whitechapel, just off Commercial Road. Given the number of beggars and street urchins, it reminded me of the streets where I grew up. It felt like an odd place for a fellow of the Royal Society to live. So this is a member of the Royal Society happens to live here. I knocked on the door of his flat for several minutes without any answer. Just as I was about to leave, the door of the flat next door opened and a woman of about 50 came out. Okay, so let's pause for a second. So Wiggins has remembered something that I think maybe we didn't pick up on. And maybe we were told about a Richard Davidson who's a fellow, and we just never looked up his address. Try to think, do we remember hearing about a Richard Davidson? Let's see if he's in the, if that address is in the directory. So there is an R. Davidson at E12. Okay, so if we had looked up Richard Davidson, we would have found it. Now, were we told about Richard Davidson in our introduction? Were we told about it, or have we stumbled on it a little early before someone tells us about Richard Davidson? Sounds a little bit familiar to me, but I don't see it in the introduction. I wonder if we overlooked it somewhere. There it is. Okay. So, on turn 5, we learned about Mr. Richard Davidson. Okay, we went to the librarian, Robert Keith. This is important, so let's make sure we do this. We went to the librarian. You have an assistant. Was he present at the time of the murder? Yes, Mr. Davidson. He's a fellow of the Royal Society and a chemist. He's fallen recently in hard times and was obliged to find employment. He left at 4 as his usual schedule. So Davidson is the assistant to the librarian. It sounds like this may be our murderer. So let's try to give him his own page. So Mr. Davidson, Richard, question mark, on reply 5, which is B3, when we talked to Robert Keith, the librarian. So the librarian's assistant, fallen on hard times. Keith says he left 4 p.m. on day of murder. So this is well before the murder, as usual. He's a chemist. And remember that if you look at our directory, our map of this place, The Chemical Society is B7. So we may want to visit there soon. Now, in the chat, Anna says Davidson brought the lawsuit about Edwards. So let's find that. I'm not sure we made the full, or we may have made the connections, but I don't think we registered the importance of it. I do remember, though, that we did find about the lawsuit recently. Let's see. What clue was it that we're told about the lawsuit? Remember, we pursued the lawsuit in the beginning, and then we stopped, and then we got circled back to it when we visited someone else. More of the when we visited more of the Royal Fellows, one of them mentioned to us about the lawsuit. Or was it here? Davidson is a fellow. Then we talked to John Young. Okay, I think this is the one we're thinking of. John Young tells us about the opal mine, how he was looking for investors. It was John Young, I think, who... Yeah, it's John Young who sued him, not Davidson. But Anna says, look at Southwest 59. Diamond mines is an issue with Davidson. Okay, let me find that then. That's important. So John Young is the guy who hired a different barrister to sue him. But the channel is telling me to look at Southwest 59. Hudson. Okay, so here we are. This was one of our early pursuits of the lawyers. Aha, Richard Davidson. There we go. Okay. So early in the case, on turn 2, or reply 2, Richard Davidson. This is at Southwest 59. Richard Davidson had a lawsuit. Davidson's barrister found a loophole, convinced the judge to find in their favor. So he won the lawsuit. Davidson won the lawsuit against Edwards. Okay, but this guy Davidson now won the lawsuit against Edwards, but actually he says, okay, Davidson barrister found a loophole, but the penalty was quite small, only £100. So maybe small verdict. Maybe he did not get most of his money back, so he was still angry. We now know. So in the beginning, we just heard here was the person who sued him and won. So we thought, well, he sued and won. He has no grudge. But maybe he does still have a grudge, because maybe the penalty is quite small. And at that time, we didn't know who a Richard Davidson was, and we didn't pursue it. We can look him up, though, and find his address is where that cab dropped off. But now we know he's actually connected to the Royal Society. So Davidson is a fellow member on Hard Times. Librarian's assistant, that might mean he might have access to that key that the librarian has. Okay, so that's a very promising suspect. Now we can go back, now that we know, now that we've got more reason to know who lived at this address right near this cab. Let's read it. Okay, so we find Richard Davidson's flat just off Commercial Road in this poor area, right? He lives in a poor neighborhood. Woman, he knocked on his door, no one's there. Next door neighbor opens the door. If you're looking for Mr. Davidson, I haven't seen him for a few days now. Sometimes he goes into the country to visit his mother. I introduced myself, explained that I was working for you. She invited me in for tea. Her flat was a single room with a bed in one corner and a rudimentary kitchen in another. The only walls within were around a closet-sized WC, water closet bathroom. The place was filled with piles and piles of laundry, and crisscrossed with clotheslines holding yet more laundry. In the center of the room was a wash basin with a washboard and a hand-cranked wringer. Air was humid and smelled of harsh lye soap, so she takes in laundry for money. When was the last time you saw Mr. Davidson? I asked. What was the day that it rained so hard? The 4th, I think. The day of the murder. That's the one. I do his washing for him, and he gave me a suit and a pair of shoes to look after. They were a right mess, with red spots all down the trousers and on the shoes. He said he'd been doing an experiment and spoiled iodine all over himself. I've tried my best, but I can't get all the stains out. Does he have this kind of stain often, then? Oh, yes. He's always messing about with some chemical or other. Once he gave me a shirt that he'd spilled acid on that near to fell apart in the wash tub. Do you know him well? I asked. Not really. Just the usual pleasantries when he picks up his laundry. He's a quiet man, never makes a fuss, but he seems to be under tension like a watch that's been overwound, if you get my meaning. I get the impression that he used to have more money than he does now, and his pride hasn't ever recovered. We talked for nearly 20 minutes, and she reminded me so much of me, Mum, that I would gladly have talked to her for an hour more. But there was nothing that came up that seemed to be of interest for our case, so I thanked her for the tea and was on my way. Okay. So, red spots all down the trousers and on the shoes. Said he'd been doing an experiment with iodine. Does he have this kind of stain often? Yes. Always messing with some chemical or another. Okay, so have we tied up this little loose end? This is not our guy? Because it's just a coincidence. He left at 4. Keith, the librarian, says he left at 4. But it is odd. Like, this is an interesting explanation. Let's write down, there was one other part, right? Okay, so the last day he sees him is the day of the murder, but we don't have a time. He goes into the country to visit the mother. All right, let's write some of this down here. At East 72, turn 7, he goes into country to visit mother. Stains red iodine. Is iodine red? And she says it's typical of him to have such kinds of stains. So, I think it's just a red herring, but we should look at our timeline because we know it sure this is going to be the guy that got out of the cab that left, that had stains on him. Keith says he left at 4 p.m. What does our notes say the cab driver picked him up at what time? Where's our timeline? Few minutes after 5 p.m. Unfamiliar gray suit, clean shaven, 30 years old, black hair, middling height. So the question I have for you is, let's say it's an innocent explanation that he's doing a chemical experiment like he normally does, but we know he got in the cab at 5 p.m. and yet the librarian says he left at 4 p.m. as normal. How does that get explained? I'm just going to make a note. 4 p.m. leaving, according to Keith. Versus 5 p.m. according to the cab. How do we explain that? Jonathan says, did the Arcadian guard mention a time he saw a person coming out of the back of the alley? I believe that's our 5 p.m., but let's go double check it. That was one of our earlier clues. A few minutes after 5, a young man came out and hailed a handsome cab. So, I mean, surely that's Richard Davidson in this cab. He hails the cab, he takes it to near his house. At 5 p.m., but the librarian said he left at 4. That's odd. Mr. Davidson, when we're talking to Keith, the librarian, he says he left at 4 as his usual schedule. And then why did he get dropped off a block from his house? Why dropped off cab block away? And then 4 p.m. versus 5 p.m. So those are two things. Iodine stains orangish yellow, so plausible but also suspicious. Sounds like we're all a little suspicious and confused. I like the idea that he has an explanation and that it's not blood, and that the cab, everyone else said it could have been blood, but it didn't jump out to them as blood. It makes more sense to me that it's iodine. And I just don't understand how to explain this inconsistency of 4 p.m., 5 p.m. Although he could be doing work maybe he leaves at 4 p.m., but he just goes and does work on the side that he doesn't tell this guy about. Remember, this guy said, when we talked to Keith, he's the assistant of Keith, and Keith said he had to look for other work. It was here, Robert Keith. He says he fell in hard times, obliged to find employment. So maybe he's leaving at 4 p.m. and going to work down at the chemical society, just, in the building. Maybe he's got a secondary job, or he's working off the books, making drugs, making meth or something. We asked him where he was. He said, I left the basement around 4 as well. Do you think that this guy is saying this guy, Keith, the librarian, thinks Richard Davidson left at 4. But basically what he really means is that the two of them split up at 4, and he assumes he's leaving, but he's not. He's really doing some illegal stuff. And so he doesn't actually leave. So maybe Keith doesn't really see him leave. He's basically saying this guy Keith goes upstairs at 4. So maybe he's just assuming Richard Davidson is leaving at 4. So I'm just going to make a note here. Did he see Richard Davidson? Did he really see Richard Davidson leave? Or just assumed? All right, so we made some notes. Anna says, neighbor hasn't seen Davidson since the murder. It's true, but then she says he often goes to see his mother. And it says maybe he saw Edwards lying in his blood, at least, so he's hiding. That's possible. Davidson does seem like our best suspect. I would agree with that. And if we believe that's true, then it might be nice to think of other leads we would want to chase down to find him. For example, the iodine chemist line. We can go to the chemistry society in the Royal Society, the chemistry department. I don't know if there's any other way to find where his house is in the country. All right, time to decide where to go. And we could see if we could track down more about the lawsuit. Let me just see that for a second. We followed the lawsuit, and then we said we should stop doing this lawsuit for a bit. So let's, Edwards was a client, defended him against a frivolous lawsuit by Richard Davidson. Davidson's barrister found a loophole. £100 doesn't sound small to me, but he couldn't pay it. Then someone else sued him. The barrister was Edward Goodwin. We know who else sued him. That's the other member of the Royal Society. But we don't know what barrister Richard Davidson used. But it's possible he used the same... Well, no, it's not likely he used the same barrister because that barrister didn't find the loophole. A few years ago, another fellow tried to sue him, but he had a much better contract the first time. So I don't think we can find Richard Davidson's barrister, which is unfortunate unless I'm misleading. But we haven't tried to go to Goodwin, the other barrister, so we could try that, as Anna says. We could try to go to the newspaper to find the brother, if we think that's relevant. I think the Chemical Society is now starting to seem relevant, since that's our primary suspect. We also made a note of the places we were going to go at the end of our previous turn. So there's the pawn shop in the paper, and then now we have the new pawn shop. The Bank of London, where the guy who hired us claims to have gone. I think the Chemical Society, to get more information on Richard Davidson, seems like a good choice to me. And what about chemists? We could go to a chemist, assuming that he's getting his supplies from somewhere, but that we don't have any reason to go to one place or another. All right, so I think I like the idea of going to one of the pawn shops. Let's see what Anna says. Wiggins to the Chinese pawn shop, Watson to the Chemical Society, Mrs. Hudson to Goodwin. Okay, I like the first two of those right away. Last one maybe as well. So I like the idea of sending Wiggins to the pawn shop where the stolen item was found. I like that idea. And I like the idea of sending Watson into the Burlington house to talk to the Chemical Society president and see if we can get more information on Richard Davidson. And then we could continue following up the barrister stuff by going to one of the barristers. I'd also be fine with going to the bank to check up John Lawson's alibi, going to the newspaper to see if we can locate the brother of the victim. I do think the brother of the victim is a good place to get information. And then, of course, there's the other pawn shop in the paper, which wouldn't be a terrible place to go as well. And then there's also the Countess who had stuff stolen from her. We remember Countess Howe, we've got her address. And then we've got the other pawnbroker. So does anyone else want to make a request for a third place? I like the first two, though. The first two seem very strong to me. So if I write those in, Watson is going to the Chemical Society, which is B7. Wiggins to Southeast 59. We'll call this the Oriental Pawnbroker. And then the last question is Miss Hudson. Where do we want to send her? John says, I'm okay with all of Anna's choices. So you think you want Hudson to go to the barrister? Well, the barrister was looking for Edwards soon after he was killed, before they found out he was killed. So it is very active. The fact that the barrister came by sounds like that's an active thing. So, okay, I like it. And Hudson's as good enough person to send there. So, where is our barrister? Southwest 59. Oh, Southwest 59 we went. That's Archibald Collins. So, what's the address of our other barrister? Blake says the lawsuit is our hottest lead for motive, so, and I think Lawson's a cold lead. I would tend to agree, although I'm not 100% sure. Okay, so barristers, Edward Goodwin is WC 38. So Edward Goodwin is the guy, just to remind ourselves, who left his... No, that's not right. Okay, so let's just, let's make sure we understand what we're doing here. The person who knocked on the door of Edward's relative, of thinking it's Edward's relative, is the barrister Archibald Collins. We visited him already. When we visited him, he told us that the previous lawsuit he told us about a previous lawsuit. Told us about two lawsuits. One was by Richard Davidson. We don't know his barrister. The other one is the barrister Edward Goodwin that we haven't visited. That barrister won the case. And that's Edward Goodwin. And we know who brought that lawsuit, right? Because don't we know that that was the lawsuit brought by John Young? John Young, my barrister Edward Goodwin. I tried, but I had foolishly signed a contract without consulting my barrister Edward Goodwin first. It absolved Edwards of all responsibility. So this is the second time we've heard Edward Goodwin. In one case, Edward Goodwin got a victory. In this case, he said he didn't ask his barrister. So I'm just trying to understand if I'm reading that right. Two people with lawsuits against our dead person both used Edward Goodwin, have Edward Goodwin as their barrister. One came out on top. This guy says, it's unfortunate I didn't talk to my barrister because I lost all my money. This guy says, a few years ago, another fellow tried to sue him. Fortunately, he had a better contract than the first one. The whole thing dropped. Oh, I see. Okay. I guess they are talking about this same client, because here we're told that the barrister Edward Goodwin, it didn't succeed. So this is the same lawsuit that didn't succeed. So I'm not sure this lawyer is going to be of much help. We know who hired him. It wasn't Richard David. I mean, Rich Davidson could have hired him also. But I think the mention of Edward Goodwin is resolved here when we find out that John Young hired Goodwin and it didn't succeed. I do want to also, this is a little side thing before I forget it, but at our last clue, we are told that the weight of the smallest, he's telling us how it could be. I mean, he says, I heard he was struck with a brontosaurus vertebrae. Even the smallest must weigh 20 pounds or more, just in case that comes up. Okay, so John says, okay, can we use the directory to find out who was Davidson's barrister? Anna says, either way, I think we'll learn more about the mine business from Goodwin. If we wanted to try to find Richard Davidson's barrister, there are only 6 listed. So we could try to guess at which one would be Richard Davidson's barrister. But we could do what Anna's saying. We could just go and at least get more information about it. He's like a watch under tension, Davidson. I have another idea for you. If we want to find Richard Davidson's, and John says, do any of the barristers live near him? No, not really. The closest barrister's in Southwest or WC. That's far away. But what about the Office of Legal Records? What about going to the Old Bailey or Arcane Records related to lawsuits and civil cases, legal records, WC 37? Let's go there instead. Let's see if we can find Davidson's lawyer that way, rather than go to this lawyer that we think we understand his role. We might still want to go to the other lawyer eventually, but I think that would be a better use of our time than going to the lawyer that we don't think is involved. All right, so I'm gonna let's do that. Okay, legal records WC 37. Right near the barrister's office. I like this idea. Okay, so those are our three places. Let's put our marks. So Hudson is going to the Office of Legal Records. That's a good place for her to go. She can talk to that person, I'm sure. Okay. And then Southeast 59 is Wiggins. Green, he's going to where one of the pawn shops down in the corner here. And then Watson, who's blue, he's going into the Lineage Society, into the Chemical Society B7, which is there. Good. Good and good. We gave it some real thought. Let's put our answers in, our move in. Okay, so Watson goes to B7. Wiggins Southeast 59. Hudson WC 37. Okay, there we have it. Any objections? Now is the time. So, Office of Legal Records, that's our informant ally. We still have to go to the other pawnbroker too, perhaps, but I like this theory a lot. I like this set. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to submit this, send move. That's it. It's sent. All right. We took our time that session, but I think we are narrowing down onto a suspect. And it pays to remind ourselves exactly what the connections are between all these barristers and people. And Davidson was a bit of a misstep on our part, just because we went to the place because of the cab without connecting it to Davidson. It's a good reminder for us that we were sort of remiss in not looking up Davidson's address as soon as he was mentioned. He was actually mentioned twice, and I'm not sure. We may have connected those two mentions of Davidson, but we didn't look him up in the directory, which we probably should have. Having his address on file, I don't think we looked up his address. Here's my addresses here. Yeah, I don't think we didn't look up Davidson's address. So that's a good reminder. When someone's mentioned by name, it pays to look them up quickly and put them on a list, a queue of people whose addresses are known. That way, when we get to a place, we can say, hey, we know who lives near there. All right, I'm still not at all convinced that Davidson wasn't experimenting with iodine. In fact, that's still my I still think that's most likely, that the cab is a complete red herring and that he was doing some extra experiments. And after all, he did win the lawsuit against him, although he only won a small penalty, so maybe he still did lose lots of money. But I don't, although he is living in a poor, destitute neighborhood, so I still think it's iodine. I don't think he murdered him. I think it's it's a false lead, but we'll find out. We will find out. All right, so we're going to wrap up. I'll see you in 45 minutes on the LA Noir case. And I'll see you next time, hopefully in about a week, when we get our replies from this case. I'll see you next time.